Due to the social and political events which occurred in China during the early 20th century, the nation headed into a social and political reform which transformed education and design, revitalizing Chinese culture. The progressive movement introduced new ways of organizing type and graphics into a hierarchy. Using elements of shape, color, and proportion, Qian Jun-tao created a sense of hierarchy in his designs which was yet to be seen in China. This allowed the viewer to quickly identify the design's most important elements, maximizing functionality. Jun-tao's clever experimentation into perspective, type, and shape allowed him to create modern designs which contributed to China's reclamation of culture after the fall of the Qing dynasty. Parallels can be made between Jun-tao's work and European design of the same period. The work of Lissitky, a Russian designer born in 1890, uses the grid, type, shape, color, and contrast, similarly to Jun-tao. Asian contemporary designer Wang Zhi-Hong also manipulates type, shape, and color into his designs to create a hierarchy. Opening his studio in 2000, Hong has created many successful graphic designs, mostly in the context of book covers. Receiving several awards for his designs, it is clear that they are thriving in the modern era. Qian Jun-tao was born in Tongjiang, Zhejiang Province, China, in 1906. He studied other creative fields like poetry and music, which enabled him to create designs which featured elements of other art forms. For example, here are two of his works he painted with Chinese ink and watercolour on a paper scroll, which show his exploration of traditional Chinese art techniques. However, Chinese art education at the time involved students attempting to recreate their master's art for several years. In contrast to a successful modernist designer, the success of a Chinese artist wouldn't be based as much on their inventiveness, but more on their technical abilities. Tao Yuanting and Lu Xun influenced Jun-tao to develop an interest in graphic pattern and repetitive motifs. Figures 4 and 6 both use just two colours. Both designs are simplified illustrations of the human body as a motif, which is repeated to create pattern, rhythm, and movement. Figures 5 and 7 both use only black and white and show the use of motifs to create patterns. Interestingly, both of these works' motifs are based on nature. Lu Xun's design uses a dragon, a Chinese symbol, and other creatures which come together to make a sort of tree shape. Jun-tao's design features the repeated motif of leaves on a vine to create pattern. Political and cultural backdrop of Jun-tao's designs and how they gave form to a modern identity for a new age. China experienced an academic and cultural reform after the fall of the Qing dynasty. When the Qing dynasty fell in the early 20th century, the country's artists heavily experimented in design in order to revive the nation's cultural atmosphere. In addition to teaching traditional Chinese design, art schools began to include Western design ideologies into their education. This happened just a few years before Jun-tao would begin his education. Another political event which had an effect on Jun-tao's designs were the May 4th student demonstrations of 1919. Triggered by the Treaty of Versailles, the May 4th movement, which occurred when Jun-tao was around 15 years old, consisted of students and literati protesting against Western and Confucian ideas. Due to the general public being unhappy with their government, a social and political reform occurred, which created a need for modernisation. After this, modern design became more of a legitimate profession, allowing Jun-tao to create many outstanding modern designs. In the context of design history, modernism refers to the design movement which occurred in the 20th century, spanning internationally. Modernism included groups like Russian constructivism, the Bauhaus, and China's progressive design movement. Modernism promoted forward-looking perspectives, truth to materials, form which allowed for good function, the use of primary colours, and the ability of the design to be understood and appreciated on a global scale. Both figures 8 and 9 by Qian Jun-tao powerfully showcase the essence of modernism. Using only black, white, and primary colours, sticking to geometric shapes, and cleverly utilising proportion, contrast, and the grid, Jun-tao indicates the most important textural elements, improving functionality. Both designs stray from the historically ornamental Chinese art, which valued intricate lines and shapes to create complex designs. Modernisation refers to the questioning of designs that have been accepted by society and how their form and function could be improved. Jun-tao developed traditional calligraphic lettering and simplified them into geometric shapes, similar to how sans serif introduced a simplified version of traditional serif type. Calligraphy brought the highest artistic recognition. Seeing as the skill of calligraphy was so highly respected, Jun-tao's exploration into disregarding a highly praised traditional skill and instead simplifying characters into geometric shapes was a big step in Chinese design, and demonstrates why he was a major figure in the Chinese progressive design movement. Figure 10 shows Jun-tao's great skills of calligraphy in contrast to Figure 11, which demonstrates his reduction of Chinese characters to block shapes. Using geometric shapes with straight lines and 90-degree angles, Jun-tao modernized traditional characters. Without knowing that the characters in this design were Chinese, it would be impossible to know where this design was made. One cannot tell which country a work is from if it is modern, but without its own national character. On the other hand, if a work cannot go beyond its own traditional form, then the work has no future either. Another example of Jun-tao contributing to modernization can be found in his cover for the Ladies' Journal in 1930. For some, the Chinese characters here resemble Japanese characters, but Jun-tao translated his pseudonym from his native Zhejiang dialect to an Esperanto version, resulting in type which appears European. Modernity is living in a modern world with new outlooks on society, new attitudes towards the world. This design was actually a cover for the Ladies' Journal in 1930. The publication educated young women and advocated for gender equality, which was relatively hard to come by during this time. Jun-tao's work with the Ladies' Journal promoted good social change, as he created several covers for their magazine which attracted attention, and more readers ultimately contributing to gender equality and education for women. European influence on Jun-tao's graphic designs. L. Lissitky was born in 1890 in Pochinok, Russia. He was a very influential figure in abstract art, particularly surrounding his inventive manipulation of typography and advertisements. He began his education in Russia, but when he was around 13, he travelled to Germany as he thought it was more citified. He studied architecture in Germany for 5 years and travelled to France, Italy, and Belgium. He then moved back to Russia when World War I began and studied engineering and architecture. He travelled and made many connections in the field, which allowed him to use German and Russian design ideas. Lissitky was taught by the founder of Suprematism, Kazimir Malevich. Suprematism was the first movement which explored the abstract use of pure geometrical shapes and was founded around 1913. Figure 13 is in the Suprematism style. It uses a selection of rectangles, lines, and a square and circle to create an abstract piece. Red is the only colour used, along with grey and black. The type that reads Wendingen is oriented diagonally. The design is asymmetric, yet clever use of the grid gives it a sense of balance. Contemporary Asian design and its inspiration. Because Jun-tao's designs were coming off the back of social and political reform, his practicing of modernism entailed stripping the traditionality from his work, instead focusing on universality. Contrarily, contemporary Asian designer Wang Zhi-Hong's environment being in the information age allows for him to design using a vast array of styles from around the world, including that of traditional Asian characters including Japanese, Taiwanese, and Chinese. This difference of political environment is seen through the designer's approach to type. Jun-tao completely romanized the type in a lot of his designs, as exhibited in Figure 14, whereas in Figure 15, Wang Zhi-Hong has preserved the stroke thickness variation that would be created when using traditional calligraphy brushes. While in some of his designs he replicates the traditional skill of calligraphy, Zhi-Hong has also been influenced by European design. Here in Figure 16, a Scandinavian influence can be seen with a minimalist style with clean lines and sans serif type, which is aligned flush left. 3 outlines of circles are placed top left of the design, demonstrating use of geometry. The title of the book is bold and almost in the centre of the page, and is therefore first in the visual hierarchy, making for good function, also indicating inspiration from Scandinavian design. Figure 17 exhibits a Western or European influence along with Chinese characters. Like Jun-tao, the Chinese characters have been romanized to create a more modern aesthetic. While Jun-tao tried to completely romanize Chinese lettering, Wang Zhi-Hong is able to simplify them a little bit, but is also not afraid to replicate the traditional skill with varied stroke thickness as seen in Figure 18. Since the early 20th century, Asian design has absolutely been influenced by European design. New design movements were founded in the early 20th century between European countries. These design ideas made their way over to Asia and influenced a wave of modernism. Jun-tao cleverly adapted traditional Chinese art to follow modernism principles. Good designers will find a balance of inspiration to create universal designs which follow form and function. Qian Jun-tao and Wang Zhi-Hong have successfully found equilibrium between their own culture's design traditions and Western and European design.